Hi and welcome back to Aasai, Rasai. Off and on I get asked a question about tempering. What is tempering? I want to explain in this video what it does to the food and how we use it effectively in Sri Lankan cooking. So to get started, I'm making a very basic dal curry and I'm just making this for the purpose of the video. What I'm about to do is make a very sort of a bland curry, and then I'm going to temper it, and that's going to bring out all the flavors. So into this dal I have added some water, green chilies, curry powder, some garlic powder and salt. That's basically it. Let it cook and come to a boil, and then I'm going to add some milk as we usually do. And there's a separate video on how to make dal curry, the basic and tempered, so be sure to check that out on this channel. My pan is ready, and into this pan I'm going to add some onion, but before that let me just introduce you to the ingredients that we use for tempering. Typically in Sri Lankan cooking we like to add curry leaves, but if you can't find curry leaves, that's okay. Onions is the star of the show because this is what really enhances the flavor when tempering. Whenever possible, I recommend using whole spices for tempering. You can use the powdered spices, but you got to be careful that they don't burn in the hot oil. The whole spices that I typically use for tempering are fennel seeds, cumin seeds, cinnamon, and some broken red chilies. I have some chopped tomato here that I will be using for the other dish that I'm going to be tempering. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So tempering basically is to take a bunch of fragrant, flavorful ingredients, saute it in hot oil, and then add it to a prepared curry or a curry that is going to be prepared. Or you can use tempering as the main method of cooking, like when we temper onions, or we temper leeks, or we temper canned fish. And in Sri Lankan cooking, we like to call them tempered curries. There are a bunch of them on this channel, so be sure to check them out. So while the onions and curry leaves are tempering, I'm going to check on the dal. I'm going to add the milk, and then it'll be ready to temper. There are two ways you can do this. You could either temper the ingredients and add it to the dal, or add the dal into the tempered ingredients. The only problem with that is it tends to splatter. So I would normally add the tempered ingredients into the dal, but then for the purpose of this video, and because I don't want to be adjusting the camera all the time, I'm going to just put the dal curry into the tempered ingredients. I'm using medium-high heat to temper the onions. What happens there is that it gently caramelizes the onions and releases all the flavors. If you use very high heat, the onions are just going to burn. It's not going to really caramelize very well, and that makes the curry bitter. So avoid high heat or very high heat. Medium-high is the best for caramelizing the onions. So now the dal is ready, I can focus completely on the tempering ingredients. And as you can see, the onions have just started caramelizing. It's very fragrant at this point, and so are the curry leaves. Now it's time to add the whole spices. Spices can be different depending on what you are tempering and what kind of flavor you want your curry to have. And here's another way that I'm using tempering to flavor my curry. I didn't add cinnamon, I didn't add cumin or any other spices into my dal curry other than the ones that I mentioned before. So what I am doing now is adding those as whole spices, unlocking the flavors, and then I'm adding it back into the curry. So if you have some of these ingredients in your curry already, you really don't need to repeat the ingredients when you're tempering. Just use the ones that you don't have in your curry to enhance the flavor of your curry. And keep stirring the tempered ingredients so that they don't burn. Especially the small spices like the cumin, the mustard, or the fennel seeds, they tend to pop out of the pan. Now this looks good. It's ready, and it's very fragrant, very flavorful. So here we go. You see that? What a mess it made. So to avoid that, just add the tempered ingredients into the curry. It's much easier. And this is just one way of tempering a curry. Once you have tempered a curry this way, just let it sit for a couple of minutes before serving. That helps the flavors to really infuse. So my next curry is going to be a mushroom and broccoli tempered curry. It's not going to be with any milk or water. It's just going to temper and cook in its own juices. So let's see how it's done. Depending on what you're gonna temper, you could pick and choose your ingredients. And I'm gonna start with the onions and the curry leaves again, and this time I'm adding the green chili as well. Now this is when tempering becomes the cooking method. That means I'm going to have to throw in all the ingredients into the pan and then saute the whole thing and let it cook in its own juices, like I was saying before, and then it's ready. So technically you're not using an existing curry and enhancing the flavor with tempering, you're actually cooking it by tempering. I'm not going to be adding the powdered spices at this stage. I'll add them after I have sauteed the vegetables. That way I prevent them from getting burnt. I'm using baby broccoli florets because they saute really fast and they're very tender. And as always, most frozen vegetables don't need to be defrosted. You could go right ahead and use it straight out of the freezer. So give this a quick stir. After about a minute or two of stir frying the tomatoes, add the powdered spices. Quickly move it around the pan so that they don't burn, and then you add the broccoli. In this case, we are not going to wait until the spices are fragrant because that's going to burn the spices. Instead, after a few seconds, add the vegetables. The moisture in the vegetables will slow down the cooking of the spices. It will just kind of prevent it from burning. Just try to get some of that moisture off the broccoli because it was frozen. But I think if it's fresh broccoli, you don't have to wait until the moisture comes out. Add the mushrooms and continue to stir fry. The mushrooms shouldn't put out too much water, so just maintain high heat and keep stirring. And then after a couple of minutes, this curry is done. So it's a tempered mushroom and broccoli curry, another way of using the tempering technique to make a Sri Lankan dish. Sometimes tempering is done when foods need to be handled and kept at room temperature, like for cutlets or sandwich filling, because it removes the moisture. Even foods like pol sambal, you can temper it, and I like to not add oil when I'm tempering pol sambal. I just want to use the a hot pan and just saute the pol sambal in its own oils, and that prolongs the shelf life of the pol sambal. So especially if you're traveling and you're going on picnics and you're carrying certain types of food, Sri Lankan food, it's a good idea to temper anything that you feel might go bad if it's kept at room temperature for a longer time. So I've just added some salt into this dish and it's good to go. The mushrooms have shrunk a little bit, but as you can see, there's not much moisture coming out of it. And that's just some basic information about tempering. I hope I answered most of your questions in this video about tempering. And if you have any more questions about tempering that I have not addressed, just comment below and I'll be happy to answer them the best I can. Until next time, thanks for watching.